Assalamu alaikum to everybody. For those of you who are not familiar with that greeting, it simply means we wish you peace. And we're glad you're here with us today. And we're all together. As your Attorney General, my job is to make sure that we create a society that is based on justice, based on fairness. The Attorney General is empowered and is required to make sure that where injustice comes up, that the state, on behalf of you, is fair, just, and equitable. This includes in the area of housing. My office, when I became Attorney General, I embarked on a number of things which were designed to make sure that people had economic justice and could experience a fair economy. And of course, housing was an important part of that conversation. But the Attorney General's office doesn't build housing. I can advocate for housing, and I absolutely believe we need to build more housing, and I argue in favor of more housing. But what the Attorney General does on housing is to make sure that tenants and people who buy mortgage are treated with fairness. And we've been very busy in this area. One case we recently concluded was in North Minneapolis, where there was a landlord who owned 260 some properties, who was systematically not responding to repair orders, and who was simultaneously demanding rent and late fees and extra fees. And we took this landlord to court, and the judge found in favor of the state, found that our allegations were true. And in fact, there was a lot of testimony, and one of the things that the judge found is that people were living in squalid conditions and assessed well over $1 million in attorney's fees and fines against this landlord. If you find yourself in a situation where you're paying your rent but you're not getting quality housing, the Attorney General's office is the place you should call. We also are pursuing cases in southern Minnesota. There's a particular manufactured housing facility. Some people call them trailer parks. And we are taking action against a landlord that is systematically abusing and mistreating the tenants in a place called Broadmoor Valley, and this is in the Worthington area. We also recently resolved a case not too far from here called Sweet Living, where the landlord of over several hundred properties tried to assess a fee on utility bills. We said, look, you cannot charge this additional fee. There's no legal basis for the fee. We told them they couldn't charge the fee, and we won an order from a court stopping them from charging this fee to the tenants. So, well, it is my belief that we need much more housing, because really building more housing is one of the ways we can reduce the price of housing. The main job of the Attorney General is to enforce housing laws, to make sure that there's fairness, that there's justice, and people are not being charged a lot of high fees for poor housing. So if you know anybody in that situation, we're hoping that you reach out to us. You can reach our office at 651-296-3353. Hopefully we can get the number to you, inshallah, and that just means God, hopefully, God willing. And we'll get that information to you to try to make sure you can enforce your housing. In the meantime, I just want to tell you that when you want to talk about housing, you got to start with the federal government about housing. Our federal government, our federal housing policy starts out, really kind of sets the tone for housing in the United States. And then of course our state housing policy and our municipal housing policy all have an effect, but it starts with the federal government. I'll start by just talking about how the tax code is structured when it comes to housing. You all have heard of the mortgage interest deduction tax credit. You ever heard of this? Maybe you have heard, maybe you have not heard. Put it like this. It allows the program costs about $81 billion every year. You're a homeowner and you can deduct mortgage interest from your taxes. But if you do not itemize your taxes, and if you do not own a home, you don't benefit from this program at all. And it's an $81 billion program. Now if you take the entire budget of HUD, Housing and Urban Development, what is the budget for HUD? A program designed to help housing for low-income people. It's about $40 billion. So we pay twice as much for wealthy and upper middle class people in their housing than we do for housing for the poor. That's just our tax code alone. We incentivize building big houses and giving tax breaks to wealthy people more than we do housing for moderate and lower income people. Another thing in terms of our system of public housing. The United States used to invest a lot of money in public housing. This is government-owned housing. But what we've done over the years is we don't have the repair budget for public housing across the country. Really is abysmal. There's a lot of public housing in very poor condition. Not necessarily in Minnesota, because Minnesota is actually one of the better ones. But you have family members and friends who might live in New York, LA, other places where the public housing is really in very poor condition. They've added up all of the repairs that need to be done to public housing, added up all the lighting that needs to be fixed, all the concrete that needs to be fixed. They've added up the repair budget for public housing, and it's about $28 billion across our country. The most that the federal government has ever paid to fix public housing is about $4 billion. And that was when President Obama was the president. So we're just letting public housing dissipate. And every year, particularly in New York, it gets such poor condition that they close it off and they just stop. Now in Minnesota, we don't have bad public housing, but the repair budgets are so hard to meet that they've started using a program where they literally allow private sector banks to take a mortgage on the asset of the public housing and promise rents to that bank in exchange for lump sum money now to make repairs to local public housing. When what we really should be doing is just appropriating the money to fix public housing. So the bottom line is we have created a housing crisis starting in Washington, and we've got to make some changes in our tax code and some investments in public housing to make sure that we have good housing. Now the state, of course, does what it can, but we need a national investment in housing. One of the things I hope we can invest in and put our time into is joining groups like the National Low-Income Housing Association and other groups, the Community Reinvestment Association, that are all working on national housing policy. Because it really does start at the top. So I'd like to talk about this with you more, but at the end of the day, if you're not investing in housing, you're not going to have enough of it. Now, the other problem is that the federal government and the state government could do a lot in housing if we help buy materials for housing. Right now, a lot of developers will tell you, look, you want to buy lumber for housing, it's going to cost a lot of money. What if we bought it in larger bulk and then made sure it was affordable? There's a lot of things we can do to reduce housing. I'd love to talk more about it. My main goal in housing is if you're in housing and your landlord's not treating you fairly, it's my job to make sure that they do. So you give us a call, we'll help you take care of that. There's much more to be said, but I'm so pleased we're talking about housing. And I'll wrap up right now with this. I'm almost done. Housing is like a bowl. Have you ever tried to make a cake with no bowl? All the ingredients run all over the place. The basis for our family is good housing. And so we need to demand that there's investment in American housing, and we need to do it right away. So I'll stop right there.
Somali Rochester Media.